In March 2020, Seattle was the epicenter of COVID-19. I was serving as the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, the only national tribal epidemiology center in the country. In addition to the executive vice president of the Seattle Indian Health Board, an Indian Health Service contracted agency serving American Indians and Alaska Natives in the Puget Sound region of Washington. COVID-19 came. The clinic that I was at was soon full of indigenous people who were suffering, who were dying around me. It was the time that my ancestors had built for me. My name is Abigail Echo Hawk. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma on my father's side. I was born and raised in the heart of Alaska amongst the upper Athabascan people of Mentasta Lake, Alaska, where I am the granddaughter of Katie John, the matriarch, the grandmother of my village. The one who taught me that when adversity comes, we don't stand in silence. We raise our fists in power. In COVID-19, as we tried to raise our hand, what we saw instead was a colonial government that did everything they could in the beginning to ensure we didn't survive. In March 2020, my clinic, we had no PPE left. My doctors were sewing their own face masks. The executive leadership team, including myself, were washing scrubs at our homes because laundry services wouldn't wash them because they didn't know if they could be infected. Every day I drive into work with a stack of laundry that each of my providers would change between every appointment of our loved relatives who were seeking services. So we reached out. We reached out to our state, we reached out to our county, and we reached out to our federal partners at the Indian Health Service. We finally get a box a couple of weeks after those requests in the mail. The CEO and I grabbed that box because we know it's only one. We're going to have to think about the scarce allocation of PPE for our doctors who are providing this critical care to predominantly indigenous, but all Native people who walked in our doors, and all people. We opened that box, expecting to find the needed PPE, gowns, masks, and instead, what we had been sent by the federal government was a box of body bags. We're a community health center. Somebody dies, we call an ambulance like everybody else. As we sat there, I picked up one of those body bags and the end fell open. Out of it dropped toe tags and it hit a table. And you wouldn't think something that small could make a noise that loud that hit my heart so hard. I couldn't help but to cry. So we packed that box up. We didn't tell our team. We kept washing scrubs in our homes. I asked my boss at the time, can I take that box home? And she knows I'm an artist. I make things. I'm a poet, and I'm a scientist. One who has worked at some of the most prestigious universities in the country. I directed one of the largest centers on American Indian and Alaska Native research. I was an Indian in every way they wanted me to be. I looked like one, I talked like one, but they didn't always want me to act like one. So when I left the university to step into a nonprofit where I had the opportunity to come to science in the cultural way that I was raised in, at the feet of my grandmother who told me stories, the stories of my father who told me on my Pawnee side, I come from the Kikita hockey band of the Pawnee Nation. We were the scientists, we charted the stars, we created the medicines. I followed in their footsteps. In all of the places in the universities who wanted me to talk about Native people but not be a Native person. And I was blessed to be with an incredible group of people at universities where we banded together and we didn't let it happen, but man, it was hard. It's hard combating that colonial mindset that says Western science is who has created everything that we use in the scientific world, and that scientific rigor is where we should be. I was sitting in a time with a box of body bags that my boss let me take home, sitting in the back of my house, crying, thinking, how the hell am I going to be a small part of saving my people? And I began to pray because that is what I had been taught. I began to pray and I began to sing. Hey, 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 yo. Away, yo, hi, yo, hi, ya. And as I began to sing those words and offer those prayers, I remembered my grandma Katie John, who fought for the life and the well-being of our people, who took a case to the Supreme Court to ensure that we had access to subsistence hunting and fishing, who didn't meet a white person until she was 13, who never graduated high school, but could tell you every plant in our village that could calm every ailment. I remembered her. I remembered that when they were saying in all the news that we were watching as Native people were dying, we were never in the news until we started to die. Then they were interested. As I was watching that news, that I am not part of a historically marginalized community. I'm not. I am not historically underrepresented in science. That history is not mine. My history is this, of grandmothers who sang, who prayed, who passed stories, who held strength and knowledge so I could be here in that time and that place to do what they taught me, to bring the strength of my ancestors, to do what was needed, to be a small part of ensuring the life and well-being of our people in the midst of a health crisis that nobody was really expecting us to live through. I am not historically underrepresented or marginalized. I am historically resilient. I have been taught to act. I am colonially oppressed. I am colonially and institutionally underserved. But it is the resilience from which I come that we will always be. That is the strength of Indigenous people, and that is what we did in COVID-19. So what did we do? We got to work. And in fact, the very first PPE we received was from the then CEO of 8th Generation, who make the beautiful Indian blankets. And they got us 10,000 surgical masks from their manufacturer in China. Community is what came through. And that's what community-based science is. The support, the resources from our community who know what is best, not only now, but in the future. As I sat in the rooms where they were determining what was going to be best for us, we decided that's not what could happen. So I got myself appointed to the National Academies of Sciences when they were determining how they were going to allocate the COVID-19 vaccine. I was the only American Indian Alaska Native there. And when that report came out, it said tribes, tribal nations have the right to determine who they vaccinate and when they do it, and they do not have to follow the states. That is the upholding of our treaty and trust responsibility. That is the law. And the science tells us community knows best. At that same time, I was sitting in the groups when they were determining how they were going to get this vaccine out and what public health campaigns. And as I was listening, I knew what they were doing was wrong. They were saying what Native people needed was exactly what the rest of the country needed in terms of doing what these campaigns needed to look like. And as I listened to them talking about, we need to tell individual people that this is why they should care about themselves, I knew it was wrong. I couldn't find any money, I couldn't find any partners. So a former employee and myself, we wrote a survey at night that became the very first and only survey that was done in the beginnings of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution of the beliefs and hesitations of American Indians and Alaska Natives. And what we found was the opposite of what the government was going to do for the public health campaigns. 74% of our people would only be vaccinated if it benefited their elders and their youth. They cared about their community because the same number of them had no trust in the government, but they would trust what their community needed. That survey that nobody would fund, that survey that we did our best on, that survey that if I had more money, I could have done better science with, because honestly, I've always wanted to do the absolute best, but I didn't have enough resources to do a random sample of American Indians, Alaska Natives across the nation. But what I could do was get it to our tribal communities for their individuals to fill that out, and then we shared that data. I had a member of the US government who was working to do those campaigns who said, Abigail, can we get that raw data before you release it because we want to use it? And I told them no, because they weren't going to do it for us. And it wasn't going to be biased, and I wasn't going to let them do it wrong. So we got it into the hands of the community. I was at the White House, Ethel Branch for the Navajo Nation. She runs up and gives me a big hug, and she said, Abigail, I used your team survey. It's what we used in the Navajo Nation to ensure that our relatives got the information on vaccinations. After the very first wave of COVID-19 vaccinations, American Indians and Alaska Natives had the highest vaccination rate of any race or ethnicity in the United States. During COVID-19, Native people were the best. Science for Native people by Native people. And that doesn't mean allies can't help us. Because during that time, as we were fighting for what was going on in our communities, we couldn't get the data. I run a National Tribal Epidemiology Center. I believe in data. I believe data writes, data carves, data sings. Data counts, data speaks. It is of story and it always has been who we were. But we know that the data that we have been getting hasn't been for us or by us. And so many of our tribal communities haven't participated. We're shifting that narrative and decolonizing data. So this picture of that girl in that white dress, what that picture is, that's a body bag. I took it into my home. I laid it on the floor, and all the work that I just talked to you about was done as I made that dress, because I refuse body bags for my people. All I will accept is life. And this ribbon dress is that. Each ribbon stitched with prayer in red, as I was taught by my ancestors. The work I've done in missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, where I co-authored the very first study and report done in 2018. And during COVID, we knew more people were dying because they were quarantined with their abusers, and that is represented by the red hands. But it's on those sleeves when I remember my friend Dale Dakota, a tribal leader from Montana who died. He died too young, too soon. But when he died, I thought, is he even in the data? Because we know that we are born Indians, but we die white in the data. Because for the federal government, they are responsible for treaty and trust responsibility and the allocation of resources based on numbers. So I had been invited to present in front of the US Congress during a hearing on equity and COVID-19, and I had this opportunity. They wanted me to speak about what had been happening in my clinic. And I was taught by my grandmothers that we have to take risk, and science is about risk. It's about coming our way, for us, and by us. So instead, my team and I gathered all of the data that we could, and when I got in front of the US Congress, I told them the story of body bags, and then I told them, I'm presenting you a report that is going to show you that is a direct result of the lack of data and the way that it has been gathered during COVID-19 and for 100 years prior to that. You, members of Congress, are responsible for a data genocide. Because of the lack of the data, my people are dying. Data genocide was not what they expected me to present. It was a risk, and it was necessary. Because like my grandmother, I know that we are not a problem to solve, we are all of the answers. And the answers lie in us in a way that no one has ever recognized before. So when I think about this, make sure as you move forward in your science, you are not engaged in a Western narrative that has decided we are a problem to solve. No, every single one of you is an answer for each other and the one sitting next to you to build up that peer support, to be those mentors, to direct your science and understanding that challenging Western colonial systems has to be who we are. So that we can sing a song like this, moving from the grief of the backyard and that grieving prayer song to the next one full of power, strength, and where we always will stand together, doing what is right. Feet to soil, ancestors' power flowing through every one of our veins as we sing. Hi-yo, hi-yo, hey, 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 hey. Hey-yo, hi-yo, hey-yo, hi-yo, hey, 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 hey. Stand. Oh, thank you.